How worried are you about a second wave of coronavirus and another acute public health crisis?
I think we're all concerned about another outbreak. It would be devastating for those that were infected and devastating for the economy. If we're going to avoid that, we need mass community testing. We need a very effective test, trace and isolate scheme, which isn't in place at the moment. But we need a better plan for dealing with any local outbreaks. In Leicester, there was too long a delay between knowing about the outbreak and something actually being done about it.
What's your biggest concern about the preparedness of the NHS for the winter crisis?
Very important is that for vaccines for ordinary flu, if you like, influenza, are ramped up.
Right.
And we're calling for vaccination for all of those over 50. It would be the perfect storm this winter if we had an outbreak of influenza at the same time as the possibility of a second spike in COVID, because the symptoms are very similar. The sage advice back in April was that this needs to be done, because you can just imagine what will happen if people present with flu symptoms thinking they're COVID symptoms, and that could then lead to a surge of cases.
You're over 50, so you'll be getting a flu vaccine this winter, will you?
Well, if the scheme that I'm proposing is rolled out, I would be, but and it's very important that everybody over 50 does get it.
Just in terms of the government and the NHS, they put millions into the health service over the crisis. What would you have done differently? I mean, they have put their money into the health service, haven't they?
Criticism of the government has been that it's been slow in its decisions. So it's the speed of decisions that's just got to improve going forward if we're to prepare for what might happen this winter.
Nicola Sturgeon thinks that the Prime Minister is living with high levels of infection rates in England because he wants to reopen the economy. Do you agree with that assessment?
We've supported the government on the principle of easing the restrictions. It is important that we get our economy open again in a safe way. It's very important that we get our children back into schools. But we've got to balance that against the risks.
Because a group of scientists have also said that the Prime Minister should hold an urgent inquiry now to learn the lessons and understand how we should be better prepared. What's your view of that? An inquiry now? When are we going to have it?
I think an inquiry is inevitable. But at the moment, I've been pressing the government on the action that's needed now to prevent a second outbreak and to test as many people as possible.
So you don't want an inquiry until next year?
There will be an inquiry in due course.
But when are you going to actually call for it and say when it should be?
Well, it needs to be
at
the moment. I think it is important that we concentrate on the job in hand, which is ensuring that we've got the health crisis under control, and we're about to have an economic crisis coming down the track.
You say that you want to lead by constructive criticism of the government. How would you rate their handling of the crisis? Is it 5 out of 10, 8 out of 10, 2 out of 10?
I think that they have not done it well because they've been slow to recognise problems, slow to respond to problems.
Below average performance?
Well, look...
how would you rate the government?
Too slow, asleep at the wheel, and they really need to up their game.
5 out of 10? 4 out of 10?
Well, I don't know what about out of 10, but I think what the public want is a government that recognises problems and deals with them swiftly. And what we've got in the Prime Minister is a Prime Minister who refuses to see problems.
Has he failed the public, the Prime Minister?
Well, he's made mistakes and he's been far too slow. And
you do a better job, you think?
We can see that historically.
Do you think you'd do a better job?
What I would do is to recognise problems and be honest about those problems, explain them and fix them.
Joe Biden said Boris Johnson's a physical and emotional clone of President Donald Trump. Do you agree with that?
I don't. I wouldn't describe him in that way.
How would you describe him?
A Prime Minister who does not acknowledge the problems that are right there in front of him, who pushes away challenge when he should invite challenge, and who is flippant about some of the risks that we're facing.
So you think he's a poor leader?
I think that he's not led us through this crisis in the right way.
So you think he's a poor leader?
He refuses to see problems for what they are, and that leads to mistakes.
Do you sometimes feel a bit envious that he seems to be able to sort of cheer the country on, that somehow he is quite charismatic?
My concern about the Prime Minister is that he's good on the rhetoric, but he's not good on governing. And there's a big gap between the rhetoric and reality.
You said when you were elected to be leader that you wanted to end factionalism in the Labour Party. One of the most striking decisions you have taken has been to sack Rebecca Long-Bailey, who is the heir, if you like, to the Corbynism project and the wing of that party. Do you understand why, for people on that wing of the party, people that backed Becky, that voted for her, that looks very factional from you as a leader?
The article that Rebecca Long-Bailey tweeted about was anti-Semitic. I asked her to deal with that, and I then took the decision when she didn't that I had to remove her from the shadow cabinet. That was the right thing to do. It's to do with the principles.
That's not how her supporters feel about it. They think that you're trying to cut that section of the party adrift. That's how they feel.
This is not a left-right issue. I have no intent to purge the party at all.
Just one more question on Black Lives Matter. You said the other day that you thought it was a shame that the movement had got tied up in organisational issues. Do you think there's a widespread structural racism issue in our country? And if you do, how can it not be tied up with organisational issues?
Well, I support Black Lives Matter. We have deep pockets of racism. We have widespread discrimination. But this has to be a defining moment. So many people have said to me, this needs to be more than a movement. It needs to be the moment when the world actually comes together and does something about it. People call it a turning point.
But you were worried that by supporting calls to defund the police would alienate a group of voters that you'll need to win back.
Well, the calls to defund the police are by some involved in the campaigning. I think here in the UK, everybody recognises that actually we need more funds for our police. We certainly need more funds for other areas, mental health, the health service, education, housing, you name it. But certainly my argument would be we need more funding for our police in this country.